Hello and welcome to another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. Today we're going to be talking about vampires, the question of do we live in the golden era of plug-in hybrids? We're going to be talking brand new Mazda CX-5, finally, and of course tax policy, because who doesn't love tax policy?
Nothing more exciting than tax policy.
Full disclaimer, while we are recording this podcast, my daughter is in a basket next to me, so if there are any weird noises, groaning, crying, screaming...
It's not me.
It's not me either, I swear. I don't have a pacifier in my mouth, but someone in the room might.
Yeah, that's what an interesting little tease there. If you aren't watching, you'll never have a chance to see who may or may not be wearing the pacifier. But
that's true.
Either way, we're glad you're here.
Casually at night, to keep myself safe from the vampires that we were talking about, I might put my daughter's pacifier in just for a hot second, just to calm myself with the thoughts for the night.
It's a safety test, right? And just make sure everything's as it needs to be.
So
Alex, let's talk about vampires and vampire drain specifically. Yeah.
What is it, Travis? Because I know this is a very popular topic in the EV space.
Yes. The good news is it's a less popular topic these days because it's gotten so much better. But the question is, what happens when your EV is off? And the answer is it's never really off. Or is it truly ever off? And so the question there is, how much battery does it drain while it's just sitting there, the vampire drain? Because you're not using it. Gas doesn't go anywhere while it's sitting in your tank. But electrons do end up moving around when your car is just sitting there. And it used to be a really big issue with some specific models. Good news is it's much less these days. And you were out of the country for a little while, and that little Volvo we have, that EX30, apparently did not get driven. It just sat there lonely in the corner. But it didn't do a whole lot of drain while you were gone, did it?
It was accidental. Somehow we remembered to ask people to drive the Blazer. So the Blazer occasionally got moved around, but the EX30 just sat there for 6 weeks while I was gone.
That is a long time.
It's a decent amount of time. And even a regular gasoline car, you might be concerned about the 12-volt battery dying in that time period. Yeah. Good news, though, our Durango and our Grenadier both survived that time period without being driven, without their 12-volt batteries dying.
It helps that it was not a cold season. My truck doesn't get driven very often. It lives on a battery tender, so...
And it helps that we have modern electronic systems that are just really, really low draw. And that's probably where we should start here. So if folks remember back in the 90s, when we started getting more advanced factory alarm systems, they didn't always work well. If you have a Grand Cherokee from 99 or 2000, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's pretty common for those batteries to drain after about 2 weeks. So I always leave my battery unplugged when the Grand Cherokee is not getting driven for any length of time, and that helps a lot. But that's because onboard electronics and the alarm system monitoring things that just consume some amount of power. Well, in the 21st century, most of these systems have become ultra low power. I mean, think about how long your wireless earbuds will last with a teeny tiny battery. We're talking maybe a quarter of a watt or less for the alarm system and the telematics system. The modem will occasionally turn on the telematics and app integration system, ping the satellite the cell tower, work with your app, etc. So we're talking really low power usage. But when it came time to start developing this new generation, this sort of modern generation of electric cars that Tesla has really popularized, they went in a different direction. And rather than having these discrete modular systems like every other car company's had, they went with a central computer that did everything. That's sort of the promise with Teslas and Rivians and Lucids and things like that, is that
there's simplicity to that, right?
Yeah.
Everything built into one system. The system operates everything. It's all set. It's all good.
Yeah. The problem is that instead of using a quarter watt, these systems can be using hundreds of watts, depending on exactly what you're doing. So we're talking significant magnitudes more power consumption, because the thing that's running the Bluetooth interface for your smartphone to see if your smartphone is going to be nearby to unlock the car, or your wireless remote, in the case of a lot of Teslas or Rivians, et cetera, where they have an ultra wideband remote, just like we have in every other car. Those systems are tied to a computer using considerably more power than you would find in a gasoline car. And that's okay in a lot of EVs daily, because you've got a huge battery around. Whereas the average ICE car, gasoline, diesel, et cetera, has a very, very small 12-volt battery capacity. It's very, very tiny. So power management is really critical. And that has been one of these interesting things that we've noticed over time is that by and large, the mainline car companies that are developing EVs, they don't have this vampire drain issue. And the modern EVs, especially Rivian, had some really bad vampire drain issues. Our Rivian was consuming several hundred watts all the time, our R1T when we had it. And of course, Tesla still use a lot of power with Sentry mode. But back on the EX30, I was shocked because this Volvo is sort of a hybrid because it is trying to be more of a fully integrated over-the-air updatable computer, and it lost nothing.
Yeah, and which is first of all just great news, right? And I think that's what
Hmm.
most consumers expect is that when you park the car and walk away, when you come back, the car is exactly as you left it. Now, that doesn't always mean that's a reasonable thought, but it's good that it
Hmm.
stood by. I have very little vampire drain when it comes to my Tesla Model 3, but obviously that is we'll call it basically the third generation of
Hmm.
Teslas, and this is almost the second generation of Model 3. Not the whole like new refresh, but improved over generations. I think I have hardware 3 on board mine for the full self driving capability. There's air quotes there for people who aren't watching. Um, but one thing that my car does that a lot of other cars don't, and one of the things that Tesla really popularized, and I think other manufacturers are looking to add, is I do have Sentry mode on my car.
Hmm.
And I have Sentry mode to set to be off when I'm at my house because that's where it lives most of its time. And I'm not really worried about what's happening at my house. Plus, there are things that would activate that Sentry mode, like even just the cats walking around the
Hmm.
neighborhood, hopping up on the car,
Exactly.
that sort of thing. And that every time it wakes up Sentry mode, not just watching, but then really wakes it up, that's pulling quite a bit more power. And I have
Hmm.
forgotten at times that I have Sentry mode on, say if I'm going to the airport for a week, and I come back and it has drained significant percentages. The good news is it has a safety on there. So if it gets to 20% or so, it'll kick off that Sentry mode. So you're never stuck without anywhere you can go.
Hmm.
But that's a significant power draw that people are probably not thinking about. And in
Yeah.
most cases, you're not going to have to worry about it. You're going to the grocery store, you go home, blah, blah, blah. But if you leave your car for a while, those are things you want to make sure you turn off.
And if you're thinking, if you're not familiar with Sentry Mode, for everybody out there listening, it's
Hmm.
basically the Ring camera for your car. So the
Yes.
cameras around the car are constantly looking for motion. If they detect motion, they will record and they will notify you that there has been activity around the vehicle. But unlike a Ring camera, where they're designed to operate on a very tiny little battery that you plug into the device and it's supposed to last around a week or two, something like that, in the case of the Tesla, they're using the main central processing units for, the video compression and actually monitoring the video for motion, et cetera, things like that. So that's why it uses a significant amount of power when that mode
It's
is
got to
on.
wake nearly the whole system up
Yeah.
to even
So
to
how
even
much
function.
what kind of range loss do you see daily if you have Sentry mode on?
And honestly, because I use it so little, I haven't checked, but I would say probably a couple percent per day. It really depends on where it's parked too, right? How active it is or isn't. So if it was parked at my house and tucked in a corner, it would end up using less than it would be if it was, at a mall and it had a bunch of people moving around it. But I'm going to ballpark a couple percent as sort of an average. I think the most I've come back to and have lost was maybe 10 to 15%, something like that, which is
Oh,
which
okay.
is significant. But I was gone for a while, right? So that was sort of an unusual use case, and I don't think most people will run into that. But there's sort of an interesting question there because there is some advertising about this feature is going to draw power, but I just don't think people are thinking about it. They say, "Oh, here it
Hmm.
is, cool, great." But if you're at the airport, you say, "Hey, there's a lot of people moving around, and that's one of the places I'm worried about my vehicle, and I want to keep an eye on it." But if
Plug
you're
it
there
in.
for a
That's the
long
answer.
time, well, yeah, if you can find one of the spots, right? Trust
Yep.
me, I look for them, and they're not always available. But if you're not in that position, then yeah, you could come back with a
Yeah.
bit of a surprise. But the good news is it'll at least tell you via your phone, hey, Sentry mode has been turned off, and so you
Right.
have some time to prep whatever you might need to do. But yeah, just something to think
Exactly.
about. But the Volvo, not a whole lot. My Tesla, generally, not a whole lot. Other vehicles, something like the what is it?
The first
The
generation
Fisker,
R1T and R1S,
the,
that was problematic.
the Ocean was having some vampire drain
Yeah.
issues as well.
And that was on the
Unfortunately, there
12
are
volt system.
fixes for those.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The Oceans were killing their 12-volt battery, which is problematic for
Yes.
them. because a lot of EVs still have a 12-volt system for people
And a
out
very
there
small one.
wondering.
Very
Right,
small one.
exactly, because it's not doing a lot. Now, what I did find interesting with the EX30 was that unlike the Kia EV that we had for a long-term tester for a while, where Kia's strategy was extremely low power usage. In fact, when we left the EV6 to test it for 2 weeks away, we plugged it back in. We left it at 100%, came back after 2 weeks, did not move it, just plugged it straight back in. It did not charge. It said, nope, don't need to charge. Battery's still 100% full.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that, though, is that Kia's strategy for turning things off is pretty aggressive. So after 2 weeks, I believe it was in that EV6, you could no longer access it via the smartphone app because the cell modem just turned off internally to save power.
I was going to ask about that because my car will tell me via the app that it's asleep, and
Hmm.
that asleep is just a different mode, right?
Right.
It's
Takes a little bit
like
longer
a
to wake up,
computer.
kind of thing.
It's in
Yeah.
sleep mode, and it's just not as active. And
Hmm.
when it's in sleep mode, I'm happy about it because I don't need it. But I can go ahead and ping it. I can wake it up. But you're
Yep.
saying that in that instance, once the car goes to sleep, you have to be there to wake it up. You're not going to be able to
Right.
ping it remotely.
Because with that generation EV6 and that software level, there were stages, and so it would go to sleep-ish after a few days, and then it would be less responsive to the app. But if you didn't do anything at all, and pinging it regularly kept it updated, but if you didn't do anything at all, after 2 weeks, you would have to actually physically start the car back up again, and then it would reset that cycle.
Mm.
In the EX30, it didn't need that because we came back after 6 weeks and it was, in the front of the parking lot here. I thought, oh, let's see what the battery stated charges. Looked on the app. I was like, oh, well, hasn't changed
That's
at
fine.
all.
Yeah.
And then I thought to myself, this I have no idea why I was questioning this because, hey, it's a mainline car company, maybe it should work, but I was curious to see whether my phone S key would still work when I got home.
Hmm.
Again, I have no idea why I thought it wouldn't work, but no, it worked just fine. Open the car up, like approach the car just like normal. They don't use a Bluetooth phone S key; it uses the ultra wideband, so it uses the same
Right.
technology that's in your proximity key there.
Yeah, and a little more reliable in many many ways. One
Hmm.
thing I'm curious about, though, I mean, and it's a tough one because advertising these things is difficult, and I think even if it is advertised, consumers may not fully understand it, and because it's a new concept, it's a new technology. But then you also have things like what I wouldn't call vampire drain, but I call battery management. And that's one of the things you run into when it gets really cold is that your
Hmm.
vehicle is turning itself on to heat the battery up to make sure that it doesn't freeze
Yep.
is not the correct term, but not get too cold. And that's one of those things that is if you don't know
Yeah.
it's coming, if you're it's your first week with your new EV and you're living in Minnesota and you park it at the airport and you come back, your car could almost be dead. I mean, that's a reality that I think is important to advertise, but tough for people to I think fully
Hmm.
comprehend.
Yep. Deader than a cheese curd.
Yeah.
But let's move on because we did get asked a question that on a topic that we don't normally talk in depth about here on the channel, which is tax policy here. And I would say there are definitely some reasons that we don't normally
You know,
tackle topics
we
like this.
dabbled this we last episode. We said we're getting a little bit too close to the big P word,
We
but
dance
right
around.
but right lane hog over here wants us to speak our minds, and so the people
Yeah.
ask, and we'll share some opinions.
And Evan along there with it. And the questions were around our thoughts on tax policy because the EV tax credit has has been somewhat controversial among all circles, right? It's now getting canceled because obviously a lot of conservatives have not liked it because climate
Hmm.
change apparently isn't real.
Hmm.
You know, whatever
That's
whatever
what
they
I've
believe
heard.
there.
That's what
Uh,
I've heard. Yeah.
I would have thought that we would be still going with energy independence because a lot of the tax policy that cooked this up in the first place and part of the reason we got ratcheted up cafe standards under George W. Bush was for energy independence because the more electric vehicles you have on the road, the less oil you're importing.
Hmm.
You know, it's kind of simple math there, if I'm totally honest. At any rate, I will say my personal thought on this one, and I'll let you share yours in just a second here. My personal thought is that the EV tax credit was never progressive enough in that the benefit pre last update definitely rained down on upper income earners very strongly because it did not matter how much you earned, what your adjusted gross income was, or the MSRP on the vehicle. They could all qualify for this $7,500 tax credit. Then, of course, they put some income limits on it and the requirements that they be built in the United States in order to get the tax credit. Now, I'm okay with the manufacturing requirement. If we want to pull American manufacturing up by some of these tax credits, I think that's fine. If that's the thought process there, and it has indeed worked. More EVs are built in the U.S. than before the act. That's probably not going to be the case anymore going forward. Who knows? So that part did seem to work, but I personally would have supported lower caps on the income limits. I thought they were a little bit high. I would have supported higher income caps on the used EV credit and larger used EV credits, because if we're talking about a progressive tax system where the tax burden is shifted towards wealthier income earners, higher income earners, then the reality is new cars don't tend to be purchased by the people that would benefit from these lowered caps. So they're shopping in the used car market, generally speaking. New car shoppers skew very heavily upper income earning, suburban dwelling, single family home owning, multi-car households, etc. If you want the working class, the lower middle class, etc., to be able to afford EVs, then we're talking about the used car market or somehow inexpensive EVs. So if the focus is on EVs under $30,000 or under $40,000, that might make more sense to me.
Yeah, I think we're running into a couple things here because EVs, especially early on, were quite expensive. And I
Mhm,
think that it's the right way to build a model, a company, is that you start with the highest gross profit and you start to work your way down. That's how you can build those different models and make them less expensive, more affordable. But it was always going to be the more affluent people that are buying these more expensive EVs in the first place. So yeah,
mhm,
absolutely. From the jump, it was very beneficial to people who probably didn't need the assist, but were happy to go ahead and take it. And I don't blame them for taking what's available to them. But
mhm.
again, when you're building a policy, part of that is figuring out what your impact really is trying to be. And that
Right,
one seemed like it was a little bit too broad and a little too far reaching. So okay, you want to dial it in. I think ultimately there is no effort to get the middle class into EVs. And I think that's because the middle class isn't the one who's buying cars in the first place. Obviously, there are
mhm,
going to be some, but by the numbers, that's just not the impact. So, as
right,
much as ideally, we want people who are looking for a new car to be able to go, hey, I can afford an EV, and having basically those subsidies, those incentives help them get there. I just don't think that was not the focus. And if it was the focus, then it really did need to be shifted a very different direction. Again,
right.
so income limits, vehicle MSRP limits, and what we have seen, and we've always seen this, is that manufacturers will build the car to meet the incentives. And we've seen a lot of EVs that dropped this feature or got a smaller battery or whatever.
Mhm,
Some of it was software locked and could be purchased later. That one was a little bit tricky there. But you could then go ahead and purchase these vehicles at a lower initial cost and then get your incentives. So it's possible. It's always possible for a manufacturer to build to a price point. They just need to know what that price point is, and then that's part of their planning and development. But
yeah,
if they said, "Hey, it's nothing over $50,000," we would see, I think, more focus on those EVs that come in under $50,000. So,
yep,
so here and then here's the reality of the situation: is that this tax credit means that other taxpayers are compensating and making up the difference. It's coming from somewhere, right? And if my taxes are ended up going indirectly towards somebody who makes a whole lot more money than me so they can buy a much nicer car than I have, that's going to be a frustrating situation. But I also think that if the government starts putting in these standards, and we have seen it before, right? More stricter fuel economy numbers, those sorts of things. Well, the consumer ends
mhm,
up paying for that anyway. But I feel like it's a more direct payment
yep,
because that means that model, let's even say something like a Prius, right? A Prius is always more expensive than a Corolla, even though, functionally they're doing the same thing. And that's because there's more technology built into that Prius. So you have to pay for that technology. So as you pay for the development of these engines, these powertrains, these transmissions, these whole new EV platforms, those individual models get more expensive unless you start increasing the cost of all your other models to help subsidize that within the product portfolio. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah.
But that is going to hurt again.
Hmm.
That model costs more. That's going to hurt the adoption of that model. That's going to hurt the folks who couldn't afford it in the first place. And that's where things get really tricky. So
Yeah.
I'm with you there. Not progressive enough. I don't think it's going to make the impact on the people who could really use the assist with it. It was a great loophole for a lot of folks to say, hey, that's a really cool, nice car. I want to get that, and it's
Hmm.
less expensive. I get it,
Right.
and it did ultimately get more of them on the road. So that is going to be an achieved goal, but just maybe not the
Hmm.
direction we would have loved to have seen it.
Right. It did get more on the road. I would say that if we want to take it to the next level and support the EVs in their second life, we as a whole,
Yeah,
as a society, then workplace charging needs to be a significant focus here. And that's where I would say another change in tax policy that I would do if I was somehow Lord of America would be the incentives for fleets and companies to buy EVs. Okay, that's fine. I think they're a little high. They probably could have been a little bit lower on some of those models, but I think that there should be much larger incentives for companies to put in workplace charging. And I know that they could use them for their own fleets, and there's some discussion around that, but like some requirement that a percentage of them be publicly available, not just for your own employees, but for the general public, et cetera, to get subsidies there. I think that would also have been a very progressive policy, because if you are a non-home owning person that owns an EV, whether you bought a new one or a used one, you need to charge it. And the most logical time and place for that vehicle to charge is in the pre-noon hours or
8 hours
around
a
noon
day.
hours at work.
Hmm. Now,
That's when
one
you're
thing I did not expect and need to come from this episode on the podcast is the nightmare of Lord Alex of the United States. I was not ready for that one,
uh-oh.
but I'm with you. We have this pool of money. We're saying we're gonna with this pool of money, we're going to try and influence the adoption of electric vehicles. Okay, but we need places to plug them in, and the middle class is, for better or worse, used EVs are a really good deal. Let's just put
Mm-hmm.
it that way, right? And you can get, especially right now, I'm not saying everyone should go do it, but you can get a Nissan Leaf, which is going to cover your daily commute, 100 times in a row without issue, really, really inexpensively. But you
Mm-hmm.
have to be able to charge it. And if you
Yep.
lived in an apartment complex and you had access to 2 parking spots, there's a world where it makes sense for you to if you've got your truck and that's your daily driver, go ahead and get that Nissan Leaf, that 2012 Nissan Leaf, turn that into your commuter, and it's going to save you money having 2 cars. You just have to be able to plug it in. So I think a big chunk of that money needs to go to the infrastructure, and that's the reason Tesla was so successful, is because they
Mm-hmm.
built the
Yep.
infrastructure and the car. The government is saying buy the cars, but they're not helping build the infrastructure in the way that I think really will
Yeah.
make the difference.
Yep. Well, Lord Alex will also remove red dye number 5, by the way. But I will also promise that there will be government mandates that require that airplane seats get considerably larger and further apart. So think mandatory economy plus at least,
These
because
are
they're
the
getting a little tight.
important things.
These are the important things.
And
Mandatory,
it's not even your belt that's getting tight. You're just saying these
yeah,
seats are getting a little okay.
mandatory 50% more legroom. The seats are going to have to get at least an inch wider on every plane. And
I'm checking my
babies,
favorite beverage to make sure it doesn't
yeah,
have the dyes you're going to take away
babies
from.
board first as well. So anybody with a baby, you get to board first.
I
That's
mean,
the rule.
they're already pretty high up there.
Forget the
So
old people. No old people in wheelchairs first. I mean, come on.
ultra status first.
Yeah,
Always ultra
the new
status first.
generation, here.
Sure.
Anyway,
That's a
let's
different
move.
episode.
Speaking of charging and some of the questions and silliness, are we seeing the golden age of the plug-in hybrid? Because I think we finally have some plug-in hybrids that are dispelling the myth of them being slow or not great to drive, etc. You've been driving one this week, and so have I. I have
Mhm.
the Mercedes E53 AMG plug-in hybrid, and you have something from Land Rover.
I have the Range Rover Sport plug-in hybrid, the more powerful version. There are technically 2, but you got to be careful
Hmm.
if you're looking at them, because the less expensive, less exciting one is harder to find. But yes, those are some incredible performance-oriented plug-in hybrids, and mine has a huge battery on board for a plug-in hybrid, and it can get 50 miles of EV driving range, and that's getting
Ooh.
from my house up onto the freeway at 70 miles an hour.
Hmm.
50 miles.
Yeah. My E53, well, not mine because I don't own this thing and I don't have the cash to buy a over $100,000 E-Class, but it
Mhm.
has a 28.6 kilowatt hour battery, 21 kilowatt hours that is usable. So interesting, huge reserve on that battery pack. They're
Mine too.
saying they're saying 42 miles of electric range, but on our 58-mile test loop, we got 47 miles of range out of it. And
Wow.
for the last 11 miles, we got 33 miles per gallon.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And that's 33 miles per gallon as just in
Just in hybrid mode.
gasoline consumption.
Yeah,
That's not doing the weird factor in the EV
exactly,
driving range. Yeah.
exactly, yep, yep.
Yeah.
And of course, you get 577 horsepower or 604 if you choose the optional dynamic package. But what I
Mhm.
think makes this a great plug-in hybrid, and I'd also say this applies to the Land Rover plug-in hybrids, is that the electric motor is finally big enough. A
Mhm.
lot of plug-in hybrids have offended people, especially some of the early Hyundai and Kia hybrids, where the electric motor was really quite small. So you had to be very gentle to stay in electric mode. Yeah, it would do it, but you had to be careful with it. With 161 horsepower, you can go 85 miles an hour on the highway if you wanted to in electric mode. You can get up on the highway and have it feel peppy. You can climb hills. The mountain pass that I have to travel on every day, no problem at all. Even when the battery says only 1 mile of range left, it's still chugging up the hill in electric only mode. And then, of course, if you want to go 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds, that is available to you if you want to turn on the engine.
Yeah, mine's a little bit slower than that. I think I got around 4.6, but it's also not quite as powerful and a little bit more vehicle. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, there's not a whole lot it can't do. Putting the vehicle in EV mode, um, I was mostly focused on, how quickly can I get things going without kicking it over. And I honestly don't remember if this one kicks. I think it automatically kicks into hybrid if you put your foot down too much, right? It's got that, hey,
Yeah.
you're asking for more power, so here's more power. And that makes sense for that class of vehicle. But I was doing 70 miles an hour, and on my, total output, it looked like I was sitting around 15-20% of that EV,
Yep.
of the motor capability. Obviously, cruising speed is very different than acceleration, but not a problem.
Yeah. It's funny because this E53 system is not the AMG four-cylinder system that has been raked across the coals in some circles. I actually thought that system, well, still think that system is fantastic. It's a really, really novel approach to electrification where there's a motor in the rear differential with a two-speed transmission back there. Yes, it's complicated, but it's also pretty cool. The key thing is that, like we're talking about in EVs, plug-in hybridization can tend to work downstream as well. So these systems are developed for expensive vehicles, and then over time, you'll find them in less expensive vehicles, like, for instance, the Jeep Wrangler 4xe and the Grand Cherokee 4xe, which interestingly use the same transmission and very similar electric motors to the Land Rover, Range Rover Sport plug-in hybrid
Mhm.
system there, because they're all made by ZF. In Germany. This Mercedes one, though, it's an in-house Mercedes design, and the gasoline engine is an inline six. It's not the four-cylinder system that
Okay.
we find in the bigger AMG models, which is a weird twist there. So this
Mine
one's
also was an
six-cylinder.
inline six.
Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. I think it's a fantastic combo because they're really smooth. They sound great when they're running, and I think that there's less stigma with an inline six plug-in hybrid than a four-cylinder bonkers nutso plug-in hybrid like we found in those the AMG 63s and 65s is whatever their
I mean,
number is now.
even the Volvos are doing a whole lot of
Mhm.
charging, turbo super with their plug-in hybrid systems over the last
Mhm.
couple of years. And yeah, there's something about the simplicity of it. And then when you are kicking on that engine, it's a good sounding inline six. And on a product like that, you're looking for rich notes. You're looking for an engine that you can see
Mhm.
and feel. But one of my favorite things about it is how much quieter the driving experience is because of how little the engine ends up
Mhm.
working, whether it's on at all or not.
Yeah.
It feels like it lends itself to luxury, but you're also getting those huge performance boosts out of it. We've
Yeah.
mentioned it before that Prius plug-in is now the quickest version of the Prius. It's quicker than some other sporty cars, something like that Civic Si. And yeah, it's just more powerful. And in this case, yes, there are more powerful engines in the Range Rover Sport lineup, but you have to go all the way to the twin turbo six
Yep.
cylinder, sorry,
Twin
V8,
turbo V8. Yep.
twin turbo
From
V8.
Yep.
Yep. And that one, yeah, I should get up to 626, but I think I was in the 550 range if I recall correctly. It was a few days ago and had another car in between then. But still significant, and
Hmm.
the quickest 0 to 60 outside of that highest performance, significantly higher performance V8.
Yep. It's this is going to be controversial. We'll just breeze through this one, but this is the kind of system that I had really hoped Ford would give us in an F-150, and I really had hoped that the Ramcharger would be, because it is really quite efficient and still very powerful, and also simple because you have a lot of the same commonality of components with the rest of your lineup that would be handy. So for instance, in the F-150, there's already a version of that transmission with an integrated electric motor. All they would have to do is stick a bigger electric motor in there, and then you use the same transmission, the same four-wheel drive system, the same frame, jam a battery pack somewhere in there, tweak the suspension, and hey presto, you got yourself a plug-in hybrid F-150. I would love to see a world where that existed. But you know what I'm less interested in? And this I don't know how you feel about this. I'm less interested in these things DC fast charging, because the Land Rovers have DC fast charge ports, and so
Yeah,
does this E53.
you know what I
And
didn't bother testing?
the DC
That.
fast charge, yeah. And
Yeah.
I am just thinking to myself, I just don't know if this is a good thing.
So here's where I'm at on that. There are so few people who are going to care
Hmm.
enough to put the effort in to do it. So why have it? I
Right.
think I would be one of those people who goes, hey, and as you know, and as our listeners probably know, I want to use as little gasoline as I can in my own day to day. So if this is my vehicle and I pull up to the grocery store and there is an open charging spot there, and I go, hey, while I'm here, I drove
Mm-hmm,
25 miles
hmm.
to get here, or I drove 30 miles to get here. Why not charge up? And assuming that the cost is reasonable, which it normally is not particularly reasonable, and it's certainly not as inexpensive as at home, I'd say, okay, cool. I'm going to go ahead and do this. If I'm confident I'm going to run out 50% of my way home, and
Hmm.
I go, yeah, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and top that off, then I might do that. But I
Yeah.
am not the one buying this vehicle. And most of the people who are buying this vehicle are not going to be inconvenienced to go ahead and find a way to plug it in somewhere, unless your office
Hmm.
has DC charging that they valet rotate for you in the employee parking. I cannot understand why this would be a feature that someone would need, and it adds cost and complexity.
Yeah. I have seen I have seen EVs, or sorry, plug-in hybrids, DC fast charging out and about in the wild world, and I just think it's bad policy. That's my thought process on here. I could see why you would want to do it. If I had it, I could see maybe occasionally doing it, but you're occupying a DC fast charge stall that someone else that has an EV could use, and you've got a gasoline engine, so you don't need to
Need
DC
it.
fast charge
Yeah,
because you have the backup plan, and theoretically that is specifically why you bought the plug-in hybrid, because it's the backup plan vehicle. And
right.
meanwhile, you're occupying that DC fast charge stall for 30, 45 minutes to get a full charge, where you could have actually run 3 Kia EV6s or Hyundai Ioniq 5s through there and had significantly more power tossed in them in that same time frame for you to chug along in your E53 for 47 electric miles.
Unless there's a 50 kilowatt one. And that one I feel a little
Mm,
bit less concerned about because
mm,
and here's the other mix again. So in my mind, I go, I want to use as much electricity as little gasoline. I would be fine giving up a spot to a plug-in hybrid versus my full EV, because chances are I don't need, especially at the grocery store, right? We're talking just out of pure convenience. I don't need
yeah.
that range to get to and from the grocery store, but I would never go ahead and plug up a stall unless I needed it to
Hmm.
get to my next destination. So so if someone is saying, "Hey, I want to put in the effort to go ahead
Hmm.
and get some range so that I'm not using my gasoline," I go, "Okay, I understand that."
Yeah.
But now we're anticipating that everybody is going, like, but stay with your car,
Right.
or
I mean,
only be 20 minutes,
the
or
problem is the problem is, let's be frank, in the world of Karenism that we live in now, and not just talking about female Karens, you can be a dude and be a Karen. I see a lot of them. You end
yeah,
up in a world where, like at Valley Fair, where there's a large Electrify America charging uh, system there, and it's relatively close to the freeway, you get a lot of people that do need to charge longer distances for longer distance driving there. But then you have people roll up and they roll in at 80% state of charge, and they're going to cook it out there till they're 100 and then leave it
especially
plugged
those
in.
folks
And
who have those free charging for
yeah,
a couple of years.
Right, and so in these situations, that's one of those stations where now they're charging idle fees, and it sort of has solved the problem, but I think they would have to stop charging at 80% to really fix the problem, and some of the newer stations do, apparently. You can Some of the stations, they've programmed it for that,
Hmm.
because if you have a lot of cash, if you're the kind of person that is shopping, random, ladies that lunch, dudes that lunch on a random Wednesday at Valley Fair, to go and buy your Birkin bag, then you really just don't give a crap that there's an idle fee of $1 an hour or whatever applied to your
And it
charging.
might be the best spot in the house.
Right. So that's the problem I find with that one. Let's move along to the brand new Mazda CX-5, because after more than a decade, we are finally getting what we assume is a mostly new CX-5. And big asterisk there that Mazda has given us precious little detail on the new CX-5.
Yeah, and what they've shown us is not even the US model, and that's okay.
Correct.
They're going to be the
It'd
same
be the
thing.
same.
We're
Yeah.
very closely related. I'm not I'm really torn on this because I don't fully understand why the CX-50 exists, and I
Mm,
certainly
mhm,
don't
mhm.
understand why it exists alongside the CX-5 because I like the
Yeah.
way the CX-5 looks, and I think it fits the Mazda brand well. The CX-50 feels like it's going adventuring, but there's no other Mazda that feels like it's keeping up with the adventuring.
Mhm.
It feels like the off-road trims where they say, "Hey, we're going to put a graphics package and some different tires, and don't worry, we're here for your adventure." The CX-50 feels like that. I don't really know why, and if it was going to come out that way, then get rid of the CX-5. But we do have a new
Yeah.
CX-5, and I think it's probably better looking than the CX-50. And I would probably still go that direction if that was what I was shopping for.
Mhm. Well, I can answer the question on why the CX-50 is around, because the combination of CX-50 and CX-5 sales exceeds CX-5's historical numbers, so it is capturing a different customer. That's why it's there. And Mazda thinks that it is pulling in outdoorsy people, whereas CX-5 is pulling in someone that wants something sleeker and more luxurious than an RX, than a RAV4 or CRV, something like that. So that is the logic. And I think it is sound, because when you look at the sales numbers, even though CX-5 has dropped a little bit, it's also really old. So clearly, there is a significant segment of Mazda's shopper demographic that would really just rather have something that looks like a CX-5 and feels like a CX-5 versus the more wagony CX-50 outdoorsy vibe. But it is interesting that the new CX-5 has grown significantly. So it's about 4 point something inches longer, about 3 inch longer wheelbase. They say that most of that room goes to the back seat, where we get several inches more legroom, a longer cargo area, a taller cargo area, etc. But there are a few downsides. Customers, or well, viewers, I should say, because we don't know how many of them actually own or would intend to own a
Sure.
CX-5, seem to be upset about the loss of the control knob, which I never cared for. I think the control knob just was awkward to use, especially with smartphone integration. Mazda even agreed, which is why they gave us a touchscreen for smartphone integration finally in some of their newer vehicles, and then B, ditched it entirely in the new CX-5. They've gone for a big touchscreen. The pictures that everybody's seen out there, they are an optional 15.6-inch touchscreen. We don't know what the standard screen looks like yet. It's probably going to be smaller, but unfortunately, the big screen comes with button deletion.
I had a Mazda 2016, something like that. I had a Mazda 3, and that was, that had the control dial, and I've always enjoyed it. And I've got it right now. I've got an MX-5 in the driveway, and I've actually got a CX-90 coming up next. So plenty of Mazda for me in the next couple of weeks. In the MX-5, I don't love it just because it's such a tall or small space, and I feel like I have to like T-Rex arm to go ahead and operate it. But I appreciate the option, and because it's so low profile, because it's not just this huge focal point of the interior. If you never use it, then I don't feel like it really gets in the way. But if you are someone who doesn't want to do the reaching out to try and touch the touch screen while you're driving, I appreciated that it's there. So I'd actually rather it stayed. A bigger screen isn't a problem visually, but actually for somebody who might be a little bit on the shorter side, reaching out to that far corner might be even a little bit more difficult because that corner gets a little bit farther away.
Yeah, we'll have to see how the software is designed. the problem that Mazda correctly finally admitted was that customers prefer touchscreens, apparently. They've admitted that in their own research, customers prefer it, especially with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay operation, which is that little carve out that they've done with their touchscreens to let you operate with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. The native system is fine with the control wheel, but part of the other logic for car companies ditching the controller interface that's built into the center console is simply that that space is valuable as well. So if you don't have the controller knob, you could have cup holders there. Americans love their cup holders. This is
Hmm.
also part of why we've seen a general progress away from bulky console shifters that were very popular in the 90s. That was all the rage, to move away from the column shifter onto the console shifter. But, Americans seem to love storage cubbies and cup holders even more.
Yep.
So, Tesla, I think helped in that process. The digital column shifter thing that Mercedes also was doing for quite some time.
Hmm.
Honestly, Tesla borrowed the Mercedes one. I mean, literally they
Correct.
used the same part, but
Same one.
they
Same
kind
thing.
of I think they kind of helped make it more popular in more mainstream vehicles. Now we're seeing GM moving that direction in a large number of vehicles, and it is simply really practical.
I
I don't
mean,
like the shift knob
quick,
thing though.
well, quick aside, I just should be going live on our channel here in the next few days. My look at the Kia K4, and one of my
Mhm.
biggest drawbacks was this enormous, chunky shifter. Where everything else in
Yeah.
that interior was sleek, it felt like it took up such a large space next to me, and I went, "This feels cheap. I don't like this." I'm not opposed to a dial knob for drive, park, reverse, neutral drive. I don't mind a
Mhm.
dial. I think I prefer that
Yeah.
to piano buttons
It
because that one
depends on the dial.
literally feels clunky. It might be easier to go,
Yeah.
I want this one, but if you're trying to do reverse drive, that would, like, what are you, that's going to get explicit if people are watching this, but you know, how are we, how are we shifting through those things easily? I know, you
Uh-huh,
have to
uh-huh.
look down if you're using the dial, but I think the dial is my preferred because it's so small. It's easy to use.
Some
I don't
dials
know
are
if you have to,
small. Some
correct.
dials are small, and
They
some
should they should
dials
all
are
be small.
and some dials are well located, and some dials are well thought out. And
And some
if
of the
your
dials
dial yeah, if your
on the
dial
column.
has park on one side and drive on the other, then whoever designed that should be burnt at the stake. They should not live through that. I'm sorry.
Park's a button.
We should bring back some executions because those are evil. If
Lord Alex.
your dial has drive on one side and reverse on the other, and then park is a button in the middle, that is all kinds of fantastic because
Yep.
if you're doing a multi-point turn in a parking lot, especially some really tight parking maneuvers, that's super easy to do. Flick this, flick that
You
way,
can do it
flick that
without
way, flick
looking,
that way.
right?
Right.
Yep.
The other option, which Ram obviously does this with the park on the one side, and it's on the dash where it's a little bit more awkward to do than, any rate, thank God they're bringing back the column shifter. But the whole park on one side, multi-point turns are a pain because invariably half the time you will end up in park, not in reverse, where you need to go to do the multi-point thing, especially if you're dealing with a trailer. That's just hell. I hate that part.
Some of them much less of an issue for 90% of people out there at
Hmm.
99.9. Sometimes neutral is weird to get into as well. Not that people go into neutral very often, but it's one you have to be purposeful in trying to do. But that's a good thing. You probably don't want to accidentally neutral yourself, but I'd
Hmm.
rather, I think, accidentally neutral myself than accidentally park myself. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Just frequency and frustration level. Yeah.
But we have digressed. So back on the CX-5, the
But yes.
big screen's very minimalist. It looks like it still uses the same shifter as Mazda's since time immemorial, but it does have a different instrument cluster, new software on the LCD instrument cluster, which is probably going to be optional, and a new steering wheel without the M logo. It has Mazda spelled out, which people also seem to hate.
Yeah, I already immediately hate that.
I think more people hate the lack of turbo.
The lack of turbo,
There's no turbo engine in the CX-5
at
anymore.
least not right now,
That's
right?
true. They have not said
Never
what the
know.
future holds, but we do know that for now, it's ye olde 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engine, 187 horsepower, and ye olde 6-speed, which is, and I know people love to argue this, but look at the history, guys. It is basically a Ford Mazda design from the dawn of time that has been modified and modified and modified and modified, which is why the transmission case is physically so large and why the transmission is quite heavy. I had really expected them to finally give in and just buy an Ison 8-speed. Just pop one in there and have faster shifts, better fuel economy, better acceleration. They did not go in that direction. But on the other hand, they also did not give us a CVT.
Well, they didn't go that direction yet. I mean, if you're going to make a new model, one of the worst things I think you can do is switch everything at once, because the likelihood of something being less than stellar is exponential, right, at that point. So you
Mhm.
always see a carryover body design, and you get new engines, or you get the new engines and a different and the old body design. So like, whatever that combination is, I'm curious what they would do next. But because they're using, let's not say outdated parts, but not the most modern technology, is it designed to work with other powertrain options in mind later down the road without too many compromises?
And the answer mainly is yes, because we know that there will be the new Skyactiv Z, or for our friends across the pond, the Skyactiv Z engine
Said,
platform, but we have no details on it. It appears, however, though, that it will likely replace the Skyactiv G engine family over time, and it will be primarily focused on electrification. And since they're phrasing it that way, I'm guessing mild hybrid, full hybrid, plug-in hybrid possible at some point in the future, some combination of those systems. We know there will be a CX-5 hybrid, and it's going to be a different hybrid system than CX-50, but they have not said different how. Is it still going to be licensing Toyota parts, but using Mazda engines? We just don't know. Is it going to be an entirely Mazda design system? We don't know that either, but we know it's coming in 2027. They also have not said whether a Skyactiv Z is incompatible with turbos. I would assume if it's going to replace the entire engine lineup, they're just going to slap a turbo on some version there,
yeah,
or resurrect the Skyactiv X technologies and apply them to the new engines there at some point in the future. But there's a lot that we don't know on the CX-5, for instance. We don't know its exact dimensions. We don't know exact legroom or headroom figures. We know it's bigger, but we don't know exactly how it's going to slot in the ecosystem here in the landscape. We don't know cubic feet of cargo space, for instance. And importantly, we don't know what the rear suspension design is going to be. And here's where I have to put a big disclaimer on reminders on PR wordsmithing, because this will
mhm,
even trip up some of our friends in the automotive industry. Repeat out loud here, folks. There is no such thing as a monolink suspension unless you're on a pogo stick. That's a monolink suspension. Every car sold in North America today has a multi-link suspension, front and rear. What
mhm.
kind of multi-link suspension is the hardcore question, because a live axle is also a multi-link suspension, since there's more than one link holding that thing to the vehicle. And you will notice that Mazda does not say multi-link independent on CX-5. Just like when Sequoia was launched by Toyota, they said it had a multi-link rear suspension. Guess what? It's a live axle in the back. Now, I'm not going to say that CX-5 has a live axle. I am also hoping that this is a multi-link independent rear suspension.
Independent.
The point
Mhm.
is that we just don't know yet, so it's
Has
not
not been
possible to
independently
comment.
verified.
Right. So I'm hoping, maybe beyond hope, I don't know, that it's not the same kind of torsion bar suspension that we find in the CX-50, because that is not the most elegant suspension design from a driving perspective, but it is very packaging efficient. It really helps you have a big cargo area and a low, thin suspension that packages nicely underneath the vehicle. But big disclaimer, we just don't know one way or the other.
I will say that if you are trying to make a divide between these two different models, and I do think it's interesting that we're getting a new CX-5 and it's not the new CX-50. How in conjunctions are those things being built together, right? There's so many models out there in the world that share a lot of similarity, the platform, the
Mhm.
general interior bits, those sorts of things. I'm thinking things like a Pilot and a Passport, right, which are very, very similar vehicles. So when one gets a refresh, the other one is probably
Exactly.
also, here it is. So curious to see how this applies to that CX-50. But
Right.
if you are going to pull these things apart, then the CX-5 should be the better on-road, more elegant driving solution, and the CX-50 should be the more utilitarian. And so if we're going to see that
Mhm.
suspension anywhere, let's go ahead and see it on the CX-5.
And there are three possibilities here. The first possibility is that this is a heavily revised CX-5 generation Mazda platform. Possibility B is that it is a stretched or shrunk, depending on how you want to talk about the dimensions, Mazda 3 platform that is also shared with CX-30 and CX-50, which is why those vehicles do not have the fully independent rear suspension. Or it could be an all-new transverse Mazda platform that maybe will be then further developed into replacement Mazda 3s and CX-30s and CX-50s in the future. But we just don't know.
CX-60s.
Yeah, well, CX-60 is a rear-wheel drive platform for
I
Europe, which
know. I
I'd
know.
sort
I
of
just
hoped.
want it. I just want it.
I do. I had hoped that CX-5 would just be like, "Hey guys, here's a CX-60 from Europe. We're going to call it a CX-5," and that would have been all kinds of fantastic.
Yeah, unfortunately, not the case. So we will wait and see. Hopefully, we get a chance to see it here
Mhm.
sooner than later. Maybe before the end of the calendar year.
Maybe, but details are still a little bit sketchy. But you know
Yeah.
what? Until we see, let's talk about our final topic, which is weird laws that probably need to die or be significantly changed. What weird laws out there do you not like? And I'm not talking about the Texas law that says you must have a windshield wipers to register a car, although having a windshield is optional. I think that we should embrace more right turns on red in America because not everywhere is that legal.
And that is something that I have to be careful with because where I live, it is legal, and where we often go to events, sometimes it's not. And
Hmm, hmm.
it, it, we should always know the roads and the laws where we're driving. But again, when you're in and out of different states all the time, it's a little bit tricky to keep track of. I think we should have more left turns on red. You have to be
I
really
agree.
careful of those things. One way roads are one where it's like, yes, that one people need to understand that it is essentially a free right. It's just reversed. It's going a different conceptual direction. But I was literally at a stoplight yesterday, and it was red. I was turning left, and the person in front of me just went. It was not a one way; it was a two way. They just got impatient. And about 30 seconds later, it changed to green, and I went, "Well, you are lucky somebody wasn't here." But there are situations where
Mhm.
you're sitting there going, "I've got room to go. There is plenty of opportunity here, but I do indeed still have to wait."
I think that we should have, instead of having solid red turn lights, red turn arrows, that we need to have more blinking yellows in reality. And maybe this is because they believe that drivers can't be trusted. This should be a driver education thing because there is a red light or a lighted intersection, I should say, that way from our office. And every morning people just stop at the red light and then just turn right through the intersection after stopping on the red light because nobody's there. It is one of the slowest, laziest intersections in. It's a commercial business area with
Yeah,
relatively large buildings, relatively low numbers of employees in these large buildings, very little through traffic, etc., but very long light cycles. And so people don't want to wait for the light to turn, so they'll just stop at the red turn arrow and then look and then just go. And I am on my high horse going, well, no, it's red. I need to stop. So I'm always the one
yeah,
holding up the show, and Rob's always
that
like,
checks out.
just go. Everybody else is going, and I'm like, I'm not going to be the one.
Yeah, I
But
would
I
have a
think,
really hard time doing that. I go, this thing's red, folks. Have you
but I'm
stood
like,
at the
I'm going to
light
get
and go,
watched. Someone's going to
this
see
light,
me.
this light is not moving. Like it is broken. At what point do I go? It's gone 3 cycles and I haven't had a
Hmm.
chance to turn. Like even then, I'm like, maybe next cycle. You know?
Yeah. But I think that there should be more yellows, more yellow flashing yellows there to do it. Or more controversial, maybe. I think speed cameras are offensive, and they should all be burnt at the stake as well.
Okay.
And with
Okay.
with them, all the legislators that voted for them.
Okay. That one we're getting into some interesting territory that I'm gonna just pass over without issue. Here's my question: are the speed cameras, and like let's just be honest about it, are the speed cameras there to deter speeding or are they to incur speeding penalties?
And it seems like mostly they're there to actually generate revenue because it's hard to tell whether they work or not. There's not a lot of data on that in the US, but we do know that, for instance, red light cameras have the effect of increasing rear end accidents and being pushed into intersection accidents. Sometimes actually seemingly they have no effect or actually have gone the opposite direction for T-bone style accidents because people are trying to hurry up or they're trying to slam on their brakes at the last moment and not make it into the intersection, which causes them to get rear-ended, pushed into the intersection, etc. So accident statistics seem to indicate that red light cameras for intersections are not necessarily safer. It seems like roundabouts would actually be the safer thing to do if they really cared about accident dynamics in an intersection, make the intersection intrinsically safer rather than stick a camera on it.
But back to the question is, if they are there to drive revenue, then
Mhm.
what is going to replace that revenue if we do in fact get rid of those?
I mean, literally anything else is better than that somehow. I will
Here's the
say,
thing. I have never had
yeah,
a speed camera speeding ticket, so I haven't incurred
yeah,
any of that extra costs. And if
I,
they do get rid of those, then I'm going to incur extra costs
yeah,
for
I have
still
never had a,
having not gone over the speed limit there.
I've never had a speed camera speeding ticket in the United States, but
That's true. Yeah.
In Europe, speed cameras are pervasive and one might even say invasive and just disastrous. So
Especially one who may have been busted by one.
so the
They may
way
say that,
right, but
yeah.
it's the problem is the way that they end up making traffic function. So if you're in Italy on the autostrada, everybody is just hauling serious ass on this thing. The speed limit's already 130 kilometers an hour in many areas. So they're going, 85, almost 90 miles an hour. And then there's a speed camera. So everybody jams on their brakes as hard as they possibly can in front of the speed camera. And then they just take the off after it. Like,
See, and
what is
Oscar
the point?
Piastri did that last weekend at
Yeah.
Silverstone, and he got a penalty for it.
It's like all you have done is slow down traffic for this tiny window
Mhm.
and likely, I would argue, probably increase the likelihood of accidents in that tiny window. But you have absolutely not done anything about the average speed on the road unless it's an average speed camera, and those are tricky because I get it, and those do have the effect that people want,
Mhm.
but then people are chicken, and so then they go too slow. So, like, for instance, also in Europe, also Korea and a number of other places, they have average speed cameras where they basically take your picture here, and then 10 or
Mhm.
15 miles later, they take your picture and they say, well, how long did it take you to get from A to B? I know that Top Gear kind of made fun of this for a while. They were like, speed and then stop and park for a little bit. And then it's like, okay, let's watch it out. And
Right.
so modern nav systems like in the Ionic 9, when I was in Korea driving that nav system in the car would do the calculation for you and tell you you've entered an average speed camera zone. Here's
Hmm.
your average speed through the zone. So we're trucking along. Cars start going super slow because they're worried about the average speed camera and they don't have this software in their car because it's older. So then they're all blocking the road up, going, well below the speed limit. So
But there
then
is a speed limit, so don't you just
still speed
shouldn't if
limit.
you are at the speed limit, shouldn't you be
Ah,
within
but these
the
people are worried about it. So the speed limit's like, so it's a 100 kilometer an hour speed limit, average
yeah.
speed limit through the zone. So everybody's going like 90 kilometers an hour because they're worried about it, but their car's not telling them. So we finally pass the cars, and I decided I'm going to go 110, kilometers an hour for a bit.
You have
And
room, make up the
and
gap.
someone else in the car was like, "But aren't you worried about getting a ticket?" And I'm like, "No, it's an average speed camera zone, so we got to bump our average back up to 100, guys. Otherwise, we're
Mhm.
losing out on this game."
So then you need to punish if it's too slow, assuming that it's traffic,
Hmm.
calculated, and then people would just go the speed limit as it's
Yeah.
posted.
I think it's all just stupid. Not that I am in favor of penalizing the average citizen, but if everybody, well, actually, let me rephrase that. I am not in favor. I am specifically not in favor of
Mhm.
penalizing the average driver out there. So if everybody's doing it, then we have to ask ourselves, what is the rationale behind the limit being set where it is in these roadways? Is it
Right.
truly unsafe? And that's where I would say that maybe we just have to think harder as a society about that. It is interesting in California, the vehicle code has a line in it that says that it's not in the state's interest essentially to make a violator of the majority of the motoring public.
Mhm.
And so as a result, for instance, you'll notice in California, California is not a big speed trap state. And enforcement by the highway patrol is supposed to be done by accident statistics. So if it's a dangerous
Mhm.
section of road, more patrols. If it's a section of roadway where there really aren't very many accidents, they're not supposed to prioritize things there. But also, I think that the way that some states fund police and enforcement, et cetera, is just a little wacky. And this leads to the speed trap thing. So in California, for instance, when the highway patrol writes a ticket, they don't get that money. The money goes to the state general fund. They're funded out of vehicle registration by and large. So when you buy a car, you re-register your car, that's what's funding the highway patrol and direct state budgets. So there's no incentive for the CHP to
Yeah.
issue more tickets because they don't, for
It's
revenue,
not
I
their
should say,
revenue.
right? It's not for
Yeah.
revenue. They're supposed to be doing it for other reasons. A, it's their job, logically, and B, safety is the logical corollary there, but they're not doing it because, our budget's sagging, right? And you
Right.
definitely see that in some states where, it's a budget thing for little towns.
So, so I may regret this. Obviously, we've touched on a number of these issues, but if you, the viewer, the listener, has a question for Lord Alex, and what would he waive his staff and change in proclamation? Reach out to us at hey at
Oh,
autobuyersguide.com.
King Travis is not going to have any opinions.
Listen, we're going to start with Lord Alex, and we'll see where it goes. If people want to throw something else in there, we're open to it. We also have a phone number. You can go ahead
the
and give us
the
a call.
duly democratically elected Lord Alex, mind you. So
Yeah, yeah. Like, because I'm curious. Not like we haven't had any of these conversations offline, but I'm curious what the people want to know and what your solutions to those would be. So maybe some fun stuff for us in our next episode.
Alrighty, and I'm gonna have to pick up my squirming little one here because she is waking up and deciding that she wants a bottle. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Wave everybody there. And be sure and send us your voice memos. You can call us at 669-842-1947. You can also record those voice memos and email them to hey@autobuyersguide.com. Don't forget to check out all the other channels, etc.
See you later, guys.